The snot in my nose is freezing. You're welcome.
While I was in Wisconsin, I definitely made the most of my time. After finishing my mom's bedroom makeover, I headed down the road to my dad's house to start my next project.
Hey guys, what's up? And welcome to my channel and welcome to Lake Country. It's called Lake Country because there's lakes everywhere, and there's currently one right behind me. I'm so excited this week for a few reasons. One, I'm excited to have another project to get done while I'm here in Wisconsin. I'm here, I have the tools, let's do another project. And I'm also excited because compared to the last 2 weeks, this week is gonna feel very easy because I only have one project to get done, and that's making a custom tufted headboard for my dad. Right now, my dad is using a room divider as a makeshift headboard, so I think this custom tufted headboard is really gonna elevate the look of the room. So it is really cold outside. I don't know why I keep doing these intros outside, but let's go back to my dad's and get started on this project. It is cold out. It is cold out. So it dropped to be a lovely -8 degrees. And that's not including the wind chill. But luckily I only have one thing to do out here and then I can move inside where it's warmer. I got this piece of plywood at Home Depot and I actually already had them cut it down to the length that I needed, which was 62 inches. And now I just need to make one cut for the height that I need, which is 44 inches. And then I can move inside for the next part.
So I got through this cut as quickly as I possibly could and got back inside where it was not -8. And luckily my dad was pretty cool with me just kind of like taking over his house for 3 days to build this headboard. So this first step in building this headboard is by far the most important part of making this entire headboard because this lays the foundation for all the next steps. And this first step was mapping out where all the buttons were gonna go. In my design, I had that the buttons were starting 5 inches in and 5 inches down. Wait, that was wrong. In my design, I had that the buttons were starting 5 inches in and 5 inches down. And then from there, each button was going to be 8 inches apart, a little over 8 inches apart. And then the next row would start 10 inches down. And I determined all of these measurements by looking at a yardstick and going 8 inches. 8 inches looks good. Let's see if that will work. And I drew and planned all of this out on my iPad, and by no means was it scale accurate. So I knew fully well going into this first step that if I started to actually map out and measure out the buttons and it was looking too close or too far apart, I was going to have to stop and rethink everything. Because I really love Diamond Tufted headboards. I think they're really classy and elegant looking, but I also think Diamond Tufted headboards can be really wrong. I didn't want this headboard to look like this because this is not it. It's just not it. I'm sorry if this is your headboard. But then on the other end of the spectrum, I didn't want this headboard to look like this. Because if there's too little buttons, I think it kind of looks cheap and just not well put together. Again, sorry if that's your headboard. And as I started to actually measure and plan out where all these buttons were gonna go, my measurements, to my surprise, seemed to work. So the 8 inches apart and then the 10 inches down were a good spacing. This left me with 6 to 7 buttons per row, and this headboard my dad wanted to be like pretty tall, so I was able to do 4 rows of buttons. So after mapping out and measuring out where all these buttons were gonna go and marking with like a little X marks the spot, I took a 3/8 of an inch drill bit and started to drill holes right at that X. And you better believe I definitely double checked all of my measurements before doing this. So next up is adding foam on top of this plywood. I got this 2-inch thick memory foam mattress topper, and I got this because this is way cheaper than any foam that is specifically made for upholstery, and it is exactly the same thing. So the size of the mattress that I got, I might be having to cut and Frankenstein the foam pieces together, but once the batting and fabric is on top of it, you won't even know that there are multiple pieces of foam underneath.
Okay, so this mattress topper that I got is kind of weird and really messed up. So I think I'm gonna return this and just go get a new one. And it's supposed to be 2 inches, but for some reason this does not look like it's 2 inches to me. So I'm probably gonna get a thicker one, probably 3 inches, and I'll probably even get a bigger one so that I don't have to Frankenstein the pieces together. Okay, now I have to go out into the cold. Okay, I have a new mattress topper and it looks a lot nicer. I also stopped and got some tea and that is warming me right up. But now let's go home and make this headboard. My nose is all stuffed up.
Apparently for these last few projects, I have just had bad luck with foam. For the bench I made at my mom's house, I just got the completely wrong amount of foam. And then for this one, well, I didn't get the wrong amount of foam. The foam would have worked had it not been all messed up. But for this project, I am so glad that the first thing of foam was messed up and I was able to switch to the 3-inch foam because the 3-inch foam made for a much nicer product in the end versus that 2-inch foam that was not actually 2 inches. So taking this pretty big 3-inch foam mattress, I laid it on the plywood and then using some like tacky spray adhesive that you use for upholstering that you can get from like any craft store, I sprayed that on the plywood and that makes it so that the foam and the plywood stick together. And then from there, once the foam was tacked down to the plywood, I cut off all of that excess foam that was just kind of like hanging over the edge. When it comes to upholstering, I do like to leave 1/2 inch of an overhang on all sides. This just makes for a really nice like rounded, smooth edge to whatever you are upholstering. Okay, so the foam is cut down to size and tacked down, but also the foam is now covering up all of those buttonholes that I measured out and drilled out. So using this super long upholstery needle, I'm gonna poke this up through the holes that I drilled in the plywood and then through the foam and use a marker to mark out each one of those holes. This part was so weirdly satisfying. Well, I think it's mainly just weirdly satisfying to watch in like a very fast forward mode where I'm like working really fast. So like I said, I took this long needle and stuck it up through the plywood and through the foam so that I knew where each buttonhole was. And I did use a level to make sure that my needle was going straight up so that none of my measurements were gonna get thrown off by a needle that was going sideways. And once the needle was poked up through the foam, what I did was take the needle, pull it back down, and that actually pulled at the foam so I could take this large Sharpie and circle around that area. And this made it so that you knew exactly where the center of the button was going to go, which was important to know for the next step. And speaking of next steps, the next step, once I had all the buttons remapped out, I took a 3/4 inch hole saw and I began to cut holes in all the foam. And that's why it was important to know exactly where the center was so I could stick the center of the hole saw directly in the center. Okay, all of the holes are cut out. Now it's time for batting. So I never used to understand this step of adding batting. I never thought it really did anything. So one project, I just decided to completely skip over adding batting, and then I realized why this step is really important. So what this step does is create a layer between the plywood, foam, and then the real fabric. So it protects the real fabric when you start to upholster. And also batting is nice and cushy, so when you add it, it smooths everything out and just makes for a much more nice finished product. And like the foam step, I now recovered up all of those buttonholes that I cut into the foam. So taking that long upholstery needle, I just began to like poke at the foam to try to find where each button was gonna go. And when I found one of the holes in the foam, I just took my fingers and ripped into the batting. Okay, I got my Mickey mug, it's a good day. Okay, now it's time to work with some fabric. I stopped yesterday after the batting because it was getting kind of late and I knew once I got started with the fabric, I was just gonna wanna keep going and keep going and keep going. So I figured let's wait till this morning and get a nice fresh start. So now it's time for the fun part, to make the actual
actual diamond tufted shape. It's actually really easy to do because of the way fabric is woven together. When you push the fabric down into that foam, it's naturally going to pucker and want to create that diamond shape. Some people go in right away with the buttons. I am going to wait and just kind of work with the fabric and getting the fabric how I want it. Then I will make my fabric buttons and finish off the tufted area.
I feel like I didn't describe the diamond tufting that well. So yes, the fabric does pucker when you pull it down into the hole in the foam, but you get a diamond shape when you map out the buttons in a diamond formation. So for instance, if you wanted a square tufted headboard, you would just map out the buttons in a square formation and then you would have a square tufted headboard. So because my buttons were mapped out in a diamond formation, as I started to pull the fabric down into each hole, I would just straighten out the fabric and I would get a diamond shape. And I really like that I started out working with just the fabric, because as I worked through the headboard, there was a few areas I wanted to touch up and I was able to fix them up in the second time around when I added the buttons. So what I did to create the diamond shape is take that long upholstery needle again and some thick polyester thread, and I would thread the needle up through the plywood, through that hole in the foam and into the fabric, and then sew back down. And this is the part that started to really hurt after a while. Once both pieces of thread were on the back side of the headboard, I would take the thread, wrap it tightly around my fingers, and pull down as hard as I possibly could to pull that fabric down into the hole in the foam. And then to secure that thread, I would staple it to the back of the headboard in a zigzag pattern. And you gotta staple in a zigzag pattern because that secures the thread so it doesn't slip right through the staples.
Okay, so the hard part is over and my hands are really sore from pulling that thread through the plywood and stapling it down. That's a lot of work. Sweaty. I'm a sweaty person now. But now I gotta make some fabric covered buttons. I got this cheap fabric button making kit. They're about $9 for a pack and they come with 14 buttons. So I need to make 26 buttons. Let's get to work.
So making all of these buttons was kind of a hassle. It ended up being very much worth it because they looked really classy in the end, but it was a bit of a pain. Because I was working with thick upholstery fabric, I had to make a few adjustments to the instructions that the kit said. So I cut out all of these circles using that template that came with the kit, but because this fabric was thick, these circles ended up being a little too big. So what I did was stick the fabric down into the mold, stick the front of the button down into the mold as well, and then cut off a little bit of the fabric around the edges of the circle. This made it so I could actually stick the back of the button down into the mold and actually lock it into place. And then what you're supposed to be able to do to lock the back of the button into place is take this little blue piece and push on it with your fingers. But again, because I was working with thick upholstery fabric, I had to take a set of pliers and squeeze the pieces together to lock the back into place. And after figuring out all of those adjustments to make one button, I had, of course, one button done, and I had 25 more to make. And then once all the buttons were done, then came the fun part of adding them to the headboard and cleaning up the way everything looked. So to attach the buttons to the headboard, there was a loop in the back of the button. So taking that thick polyester thread again and using the lark's head knot, which you can see right here, I attached the button and the thread together. And this is the part that cleaned everything up and tightened up all of the fabric. Because the button has more surface area, this was able to pull the fabric down further into the hole in the foam, and then I stapled everything in place using the zigzag method again. And right around here is when my dad got home from work to see how this project was progressing, and let's just say this man really wanted to be in this video.
This right here is really good.
Back up!
Really nice work right here. I noticed the buttons
Wow, doggy loves it.
I'm not really sure what he was trying to accomplish with the weird dog statue, but I guess you now know where I get my weird sense of humor from. Anyway, besides my dad being a complete ding-dong, it was really cool to have him watch me work because upholstering and building furniture runs in the family on my dad's side. My grandfather upholstered and built furniture, my great-grandfather upholstered and built furniture, my great-great-grandfather, and so on and so forth. So it was really cool to have him see me carry on the family tradition. And as I worked through this headboard, adding all of the buttons, I also took that fabric along the edge and pulled it around to the back to finish off this diamond tufted area.
Okay, so the really hard part, the time-consuming part of the headboard is over. And I could stop here and just pop some legs onto this thing and call it a day. But here on my channel, I like to go above and beyond. So I'm gonna be building a frame and upholstering it for around this part of the headboard to make it even bigger and grander of a headboard. Also, the frame is going to come down and be the legs of the headboard so this thing can get lifted up. So I have to go outside, but luckily it's not -8 today. It is 15 degrees outside, so we're having a tropical heat wave. I'm gonna go outside and get to work cutting down some 2x4s to build a frame.
Making this frame was super easy. I took one of the 2x4s and cut it to the exact width of the diamond tufted area. And then taking the other two 2x4s, I cut those down so that this headboard would get hoisted to the desired height. And then once I had those 3 pieces cut down, I moved back inside and used some pocket holes to put everything together. Because it's not a project of mine until I get a Craig jig out. And I quickly threw this frame together, and in the end, everything gets covered up, so it didn't really matter the way this frame looked as long as it was sturdy. Once the frame was together, taking that very important batting, I added that to the outside of the frame. I was a little nervous that if I added batting to the inside of the frame and then added fabric, it would make the inside too tight and the diamond tufted area wouldn't fit. So I only added the batting to the outside to smooth out the edges. Then taking the fabric, I cut 3 long strips that were 9 inches wide and sewed those 3 pieces up so that the seams met at the corners. I did get my measurements wrong at first, so I had to rip everything off and start back over and cut a new piece. But once I fixed that all up, the seams met at the corners and I got a nice 45-degree angle look in the fabric. And then this frame was looking good. So to attach the tufted area and the frame together, I got a bunch of these flat T-brackets that I used to put everything together. And the final step to making this headboard wasn't totally necessary, but it definitely cleaned everything up. So since the back of the headboard looked like this, I wanted to cover all of that up and make everything look nice. So taking this thin black fabric, I stapled that to the back to cover everything up, and I even stapled it to the back of the legs to clean everything up. And now my dad really wanted a surprise reveal like my mom got, so I sent my dad upstairs while I set up this headboard so that he could have his moment to shine.
The buttons are just beautiful.
You're so stupid.
Yup, he's a ding-dong, but you know what? So am I. I'm so glad I got to do this project for my dad. This is my first ever diamond tufted headboard that I made, and I am very happy with how it turned out. And I think the upholstered frame around the edge really took this headboard up a notch. Had I not added that, I think this headboard definitely would have been missing something. I hope you guys liked this video. As always, thanks so much for watching. I will see you in the next one. Bye, guys.